blouse was buttoned wrong. That was the first thing I noticed when my daughter opened the door. The second button from the top was in the wrong hole, pulling the fabric slightly crooked. It was a small thing, the kind of thing most people wouldn't catch. But I'm her father. I've known her since she was 4 days old and learning how to breathe on her own in a hospital incubator. I noticed everything about her. She smiled when she saw me standing on the porch with a bag of groceries. "Papa, you didn't have to do that," she said. "Your mother made her chicken soup," I told her. You know how she gets when she thinks someone needs feeding. That made her laugh, and for a second, she looked like herself again. Just for a second. Then she stepped back to let me in, and I saw the rest of her. She'd lost weight since Thanksgiving, not a little. I'm talking maybe 15 pounds in 3 months. Her cheekbones were too sharp. The skin under her eyes had that grayish color you see on people coming out of a hospital, and the way she moved, slow, careful, like everything hurt a little bit. That wasn't my daughter. My daughter used to run half marathons. She used to wake up at 5 in the morning to go to the gym before work. She'd coached her son's Little League team 2 seasons in a row and been louder than any parent on the sidelines. The woman standing in front of me in a crooked blouse was not that woman. "You look tired, sweetheart," I said, because that felt safer than the truth. "I'm fine, Papa. Just the bug I can't shake." Her husband was in the living room. I heard the TV before I saw him. Some sports recap show, volume too loud. He got up when I walked in, extended his hand, gave me the firm shake that always felt slightly performative, like he'd practiced it to make the right impression. "Good to see you, sir," he said. His name was Garrett. They'd been married 4 years. I had never fully warmed to him, and I'd always felt quietly ashamed of that, the way you feel guilty about not liking someone when you can't point to a specific reason. He was polite. He had a decent job in insurance. He remembered to ask about my back surgery. All the right behaviors. But there was something behind his eyes when he looked at her, a flatness, a calculation, that I'd never been able to explain to my wife when I tried to describe it. "Helen made soup," I said, holding up the container. "For your wife." "That's very kind," he said, and then he reached over and took the container from me before she could. I told myself it was nothing. People do things like that all the time. I stayed for about 2 hours. My daughter sat in the armchair near the window, wrapped in a blanket even though it wasn't cold, and we talked about the kids' school and her sister's upcoming birthday and whether or not my wife and I were actually going to take that trip to the Grand Canyon we've been talking about for 12 years. Garrett stayed in the room the entire time. Every time I tried to catch my daughter's eye alone, he was there. When she went to the kitchen to get water, he went with her. When I left, I sat in my car for a long time before I turned the key. Something was wrong. I didn't have a name for it. I didn't have evidence. All I had was 42 years of loving my daughter, and every one of those years was telling me something was wrong. I drove home and told my wife. She was quiet while she listened, the way she gets when she's thinking hard. "She could really just be sick," Helen said finally. "She could be," I said, "but she's not." My wife knew me well enough to take that seriously. The next morning, I called my daughter. She didn't pick up. I called again in the afternoon. She called back 2 hours later, whispering, and I could hear a door close somewhere on her end before she spoke at normal volume. "Sorry, Papa. I was just napping. You were whispering." A pause. The kids were sleeping too. "Irene," I said. "That's her name. Tell me how you're really feeling." "I told you. A bug I can't shake." "How long?" Another pause. Longer this time. "A couple months. 2 months." She'd been sick for 2 months, and this was the first I was hearing about it. My daughter, who used to call me when she had a bad day at work just to talk. My daughter, who sent me voice memos when she found a new restaurant she thought I'd like. 2 months of this and I'd been hearing nothing but, "I'm fine, Papa. Have you seen a doctor? Garrett says it's probably stress, that I should rest more." "Garrett says." I repeated it slowly. "Your husband says, not a doctor." "Papa, I'm taking you to the doctor." She started to protest, and I let her talk herself out, and then I said it again. "I'm taking you to the doctor. This week. If you're fine, great. But you're going." She agreed the way you agree when you're too tired to argue. I told myself that was because she was sick. I didn't let myself think too hard about the other reasons someone might not have the energy to push back anymore. I picked her up Thursday morning. Garrett was at work. When she got into my car, I watched her buckle her seatbelt, and I noticed the bruise on her wrist. Faint, yellowish green, the color of a bruise that's a week or so old. She saw me looking and pulled her sleeve down. "Caught it on the cabinet door," she said. Before I could ask anything, I didn't push it, not yet. The doctor was a woman named Dr. Okonkwo, who my wife had been seeing for 10 years and trusted completely. I'd called ahead and asked her to take her time with my daughter, to look carefully. She'd heard something in my voice, and she'd said, "I understand," in a way that meant she actually did. I sat in the waiting room for almost an hour. When Dr. Okonkwo came out, she didn't look at me the way doctors do when everything's fine. She looked at me the way they look at you when they need a moment before they speak. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "could you come with me?" The hallway was quiet. She didn't take me far, just around a corner, out of earshot of the waiting room. "Your daughter is severely malnourished," she said. "Her iron levels are critically low. She's dehydrated in a way that suggests this has been ongoing for some time." She paused. "I also found significant bruising on her torso and upper arms." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "She says she's been falling." Dr. R. Okonkwo said, and the quiet way she said it told me she didn't believe it either. "Is there anything else?" She looked at me steadily. "I've ordered blood panels. Full tox screen. I want to see the results before I say more." Another pause. "But I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to hear it seriously. Does your daughter feel safe at home?" There it was, said out loud by someone else in a fluorescent-lit hospital hallway, and the sound of it was like something cracking open in my chest. "I don't know," I said, and that was the most frightening thing I'd ever admitted out loud. "She needs to stay here tonight," Dr. Okonkwo said, "for observation. I'll tell her it's precautionary, related to the dehydration, but I'd like her here while we wait for results." "Does she have to go home after?" "Dr. Okonkwo looked at me. "Mr. Calloway, until I have those results and until I understand more about those bruises, no, I don't think she should go home." I went back and sat beside my daughter. She was lying in a hospital bed looking small and exhausted, and when she saw my face she started crying, not dramatically, just quietly the way people cry when they've been holding it in for too long and the smallest thing breaks the seal. "Papa," she whispered. "You're not going home tonight," I said, "and you're not going home until we figure out what's happening." She didn't fight me. That scared me more than anything. That evening I called Garrett from my truck in the hospital parking lot. I told him Irene was being kept overnight for observation, that the dehydration was more serious than expected. He made the right sounds. Concern, questions, offers to come by. I told him the hospital had a visiting policy, and it was easier if he stayed home with the kids. He accepted that more easily than I expected, a worried husband to. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about small moments over the past year that I'd explained away. The time Irene had canceled Easter dinner at our house at the last minute because she wasn't feeling well. The way she'd stopped posting photos of herself on social media, just the kids, never her. The Christmas gathering where she'd laughed at something my son-in-law said, but the laugh never reached her eyes. The way she'd flinched once, just slightly, when he reached past her for the salt shaker. I had explained every single one of those moments away. I was disgusted with myself. The blood panel results came back 2 days later. Dr. Okonkwo called me before she called anyone else, because I'd asked her to. "The tox screen showed elevated heavy metals," she said, "specifically antimony." I didn't know what that was. She explained it. "It's a metallic compound found in industrial materials, certain paints, flame retardants, some electronics. It accumulates in the body over time. Chronic, low-level exposure causes exactly what my daughter had been experiencing: fatigue, weight loss, nausea, gastrointestinal problems, disorientation, weakness. It doesn't get into someone's bloodstream by accident," Dr. Okonkwo said. I sat very still. "Mr. Calloway, I've already contacted the authorities. This is a mandatory reporting situation. There will be a detective coming to speak with your daughter today." I went back inside. Telling Irene was the hardest conversation I've ever had. Not because she didn't believe me, she did. Almost immediately, which was the worst part. The way she just sat there and said, "Oh," in this small, flat voice. Like some part of her had already known and had just been waiting for someone to say it out loud. "How?" she asked. "Not who. How?" "They don't know yet," I said. "But they're going to find out." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He used to make my tea every morning. He was very particular about it. He'd never let me make it myself. I thought about the container of soup he'd taken out of my hands. Detective Arroyo came that afternoon, a compact, direct woman who had clearly done this many times before. She sat with Irene for over an hour. I waited outside. When she came out, she told me they'd be seeking a warrant to search the house. "Has your son-in-law had any prior incidents, domestically or otherwise?" she asked. "Not that I know of," I said. "We'll look into his background." They found the antimony in the garage tucked behind a pegboard of tools, dissolved in a solution in an unlabeled bottle. They also found a life insurance policy on my daughter, taken out 18 months ago, with a payout of $800,000. She hadn't known about it. Her name was on it, but he'd handled all the paperwork himself. Then the detectives found something else. Garrett had been married before. His first wife, a woman named, the detective read it from her notes, a woman who had died 4 years earlier, 2 years before he and Irene got together. The cause of death had been listed as cardiac arrhythmia. She'd been 31 years old. She'd also, in the months before her death, lost significant weight, complained of exhaustion, and been treated repeatedly for what her doctors thought was an autoimmune disorder. Her blood had never been tested for heavy metals. Nobody had thought to look. When Detective Arroyo told me this, we were standing in the hospital corridor again, the same spot where Dr. Okonkwo had told me about the bruises. I remember the exact pattern of the floor tiles because I was staring at them. "He's done this before," I said. "That's what we believe," she said. I asked her if my daughter needed to do anything, if they needed her to go back. She shook her head. "We have enough," she said. "Garrett was arrested on a Tuesday, 6 days after I first drove Irene to that appointment. He was charged with aggravated assault, domestic abuse, and attempted murder in my daughter's case. The investigation into his first wife's death was reopened in the state where she'd lived, and within 3 months, prosecutors there filed a separate charge of murder in the second degree. When the investigators searched deeper into his financial records, they found he'd already begun quietly liquidating assets. A brokerage account, savings bonds he'd moved into a business LLC with a name my daughter had never heard of. Another 8 weeks, and it's possible he would have finished what he started before anyone realized what was happening. I've never allowed myself to think too long about that." The kids stayed with us while the legal process moved forward. My grandchildren, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6. They didn't fully understand what was happening, which I was grateful for. They adjusted better than I did. Kids have this capacity to anchor themselves in the immediate moment that adults completely lose somewhere along the way. By the second night, they were fighting over who got to use my wife's electric blanket and asking what we were having for dinner like it was any other sleepover. Irene stayed in the guest room. She slept more than I'd ever seen a person sleep. For the first week, she mostly ate soup and sat on the back porch and watched the birds at the feeder my wife had set up years ago. She didn't talk much, and we didn't push her. Some things need space more than they need words. She started talking about 8 days in, not about Garrett specifically, not at first, just about small things. How she'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without dread, how she hadn't realized, until she was away from it, how much energy she'd been spending every day just trying to predict his moods, trying to stay 2 steps ahead of whatever might set him off. "I kept thinking I was imagining it," she told me one evening. We were sitting at the kitchen table after the kids had gone to bed, and she had both hands wrapped around her coffee mug like she was cold, even though it was warm in the house. Every time something happened, he had an explanation, and the explanation was always reasonable, and I always ended up feeling like I was the one being unfair. "That's what people like that do," I said. "I know that now." She looked at her coffee. "I just wish I'd known it sooner." "You knew something was wrong," I said. "You just didn't know what." She thought about that for a moment. "How did you know?" she asked. "When you came to the house that day, what was it?" I told her about the blouse. The button in the wrong hole. She stared at me. "Your blouse was buttoned wrong," I said. "And I thought my daughter has been getting dressed by herself since she was 5 years old, and she has never once buttoned her clothes crooked. And I thought, whatever is happening in this house, whatever she's carrying, it's heavy enough to knock her sideways." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't even notice." "I know," I said. "That's how I knew." The trial took most of the following year. Irene was a witness. She was composed on the stand in a way that made me proud and broke my heart at the same time, because I could see how much that composure was costing her. The jury deliberated for less than 3 days, guilty on all counts. The sentencing came 4 weeks later. I drove her to the courthouse both days. We held hands in the car on the way there and didn't talk much the way we used to when she was little and I was driving her to something she was scared of, like her first swim meet or her school spelling bee. He's in federal prison now. The case involving his first wife is still working through the courts in another state, but the last time I spoke to Detective Arroyo, she told me they were confident. Irene bought a house. Small, in a good school district, about 12 minutes from us. She went back to work part-time first, then full-time when she felt ready. She started going to a support group for survivors of domestic abuse, something her therapist recommended, and she told me once, carefully, that it helped more than she expected to be in a room full of people who didn't need things explained to them. My grandson scored his first goal of the soccer season last fall. Irene was on the sideline. I watched her cup her hands around her mouth and yell herself hoarse, and I thought, there she is. There's my daughter. There are things that stay with me. The bottle in the garage, behind the tools. Something I must have walked past a dozen times without knowing what it was. The insurance policy. The first wife, and how close she came to being forgotten entirely, her death explained away and filed under a condition nobody thought to question. I think about her family. I think about what they didn't know, and whether they'd spend 4 years blaming themselves for missing something. I think about the morning I decided to push back when my daughter said she was fine. My wife tells me I saved Irene's life. I don't entirely believe that. Dr. Kerfheim, Okonkwo saved her life, and Detective Arroyo's investigation, and the forensic toxicologist who knew what to test for. But I know that if I had driven away from that house without sitting in my truck for a long time, if I had taken my daughter at her word, if I told myself I was overreacting, being a meddling father, reading too much into a crooked button on a blouse, I think about that version of this story too. If your child seems different, not dramatically, not in a way you can easily name, if something small is off, if the laugh doesn't reach the eyes, if they always happen to be busy when you call, if your gut is telling you something that your head can't yet justify, listen to it. You don't need a reason to check on the people you love. You just need to show up. I've had a lot of time to sit with everything that happened. More time than I wanted, honestly. And the thing I keep coming back to isn't the arrest, or the courtroom, or even the moment Dr. Okonkwo told me about the antimony. The thing I keep coming back to is a single button on a blouse. That's all it was. One button in the wrong hole. And I almost talked myself out of it. There's something I've learned, not from a book, not from anyone who sat me down and explained it, but from living long enough to watch cause-follow effect, the way water follows a slope. The choices people make don't stay contained. They spread. Garrett made choices, small ones at first probably, choices that seemed manageable and private, choices he thought nobody would trace back to him. And those choices accumulated. They built a structure, and that structure eventually had a weight that nothing could hold up forever. It collapsed the way dishonest things always collapse. Not all at once, but in a way that, looking back, feels inevitable. I think about Irene and how long she spent inside that collapsing structure without realizing it. She's one of the most intelligent people I know. She has a graduate degree. She ran a department of 20 people before she took time off to raise her kids, and she still couldn't see it clearly from the inside. That's not a failure of intelligence. That's what prolonged manipulation does. It doesn't attack your mind directly. It slowly adjusts your sense of what's normal until you've lost your reference point entirely. Getting it back requires distance. It requires someone from the outside who still remembers what you looked like before. That's what I had. I had the memory of my daughter as she was, and when who she was didn't match what I was seeing, I didn't let myself dismiss that gap. I think that's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not some dramatic lesson about evil husbands or hidden poisons, something quieter than that. The people you love deeply, you carry a picture of them in your mind that's built from years of small moments. The way they laugh, the way they move, the way they button a blouse. That picture is data. When reality stops matching it, that mismatch is telling you something. Don't negotiate with that feeling. Don't talk yourself out of it to avoid being inconvenient. And if you're the one on the inside of something that's slowly shrinking your world, if you've stopped calling people back, stopped showing up, stopped recognizing yourself in the mirror, that's not weakness. That's not failure. That's what happens when someone has spent a long time making you doubt your own perception. The strength isn't in having seen it sooner. The strength is in what you do when someone finally hands you a way out. Irene is proof of that. She didn't fall apart when the truth came out. She got quiet for a while, and then she got up. She went back to work. She found the house with a yard her kids love. She stood on a soccer sideline last fall and yelled herself hoarse, cheering for her son. That's not someone who was broken. That's someone who was temporarily buried and who turned out to be exactly strong enough to climb back out once the weight was lifted. The people who hurt others the way Garrett did, they count on silence. They count on the target being too exhausted to speak, too confused to be believed, too isolated to have anyone looking closely. The one thing they cannot survive is someone showing up and paying attention. So pay attention. Show up. That's really all it takes.